Hi, good evening and welcome to the 5th Practice-Based Learning webinar. My name is Kalima Ibrahim. I'm RCOT board member for England and chair of the England board and also a lecturer at the University of East London. So we're RCOT, so we champion occupational therapy. We're here to achieve life-changing breakthroughs for our members and for the people they support and for society as a whole. So we promote the value of occupation and improving people's health and well-being. We promote the value of occupational therapy as a means of improving people's health and well-being. And we have a vision that people everywhere value the life-changing power of occupational therapy. So our profession is growing, so we have over 45 education providers delivering over 100 programs with over 7,000 learners and over 1,700 new graduates. And increasingly diverse cohorts experiencing a range of practice-based learning opportunities across the 4 pillars of practice. So we need to think differently about our placement opportunities to meet the needs of our learners, our services, and the people that we serve. So the principles of practice-based learning, working together to develop our future workforce, was launched on the 20th of October, 2022, a joint venture with the CSP. So these are the 7 practice-based learning principles, and there'll be a link in the chat that you can have a look at the website and download those. So this webinar is called Exclusion, Prejudice and Discrimination, Supporting Equity, Diversity and Belonging in a Practice-Based Environment. So we have 3 presentations today. So our first presentation is called Learning from Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Incidents. And the second is Bridging the Gap to Leadership. And the third is Developing Resources for just, equitable and inclusive practice placements, a fireside chat with OT at Brunel, and also a question and answer. So after the 3 presentations, we'll have a question and answer at the end for all of the presentations. So this webinar is relevant to the principles of practice-based learning. So we've matched them to 2 and 7, but there are probably more that they will cover. And also the learning and development standards for pre-registration education and the career development framework. And comments and questions, if you please put your questions in the questions box and share your thoughts in the chat and on social media, and hashtag RCOTPBL, and also these are our Twitter handles. Okay, so the first presentation we have is Learning from Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Incidents with Simone Welch, a Specialist Senior Occupational Therapist from Imperial College, NHS Healthcare, NHS Trust. And if you'd just like to put your questions as we go along for Simone, and also put your comments in the chat, and then we'll get to your questions at the end. Okay, go ahead, Simone.
Hello everyone, I'm Simone. I'm one of the specialist senior occupational therapists at Imperial for stroke, but today I will be talking about learning from equality, diversity and inclusion instances within the workplace and on placements. So the first thing I thought I'd start off with was just giving a bit of a definition for everyone so we all understand what equality, diversity and inclusion is. So if we look at also known as short for EDI, it ensures fair treatment and equality of opportunities for all. It aims to eradicate prejudice and discrimination on the basis of an individual or group of individuals' protected characteristics. And if we look at the Equality Act, protected characteristics include support to reduce discrimination on the basis of someone's age, disability, gender reassignment, race, religion or belief, their sex, gender, sexual orientation, pregnancy and maternity, and marriage or civil partnership. So if we think about what EDI incidences within the workplace or on placement looks like, these would breach this concept and would usually breach trust values as well. For example, at Imperial, we have the trust value of kindness. If we also look into local trust policy, there's usually a 0 tolerance policy to acts of discrimination within the workplace, and also other policies around bullying and harassment. But what we do know is in practice, there's inconsistency in the approach to not only different trusts, but within different places of work within that workplace. Just to start off with a bit of a broader picture, this topic is so important, and it's important to remember that this is not something that exclusively happens within NHS or social care. Discrimination happens on a global picture. So there is a broader spectrum of how different people, based on their protected characteristics, can be treated differently in all aspects of their daily living. And it's just a little bit of statistics on the HCPC diversity data that was out in 2021. 18% of registrants completed the survey. So obviously what that's highlighting is that what we're seeing in these statistics isn't the full picture, but from those 18%, women represent a significant proportion of 76%. The average age is 42, and within physiotherapy, for example, it's 40. 8% of registrants reported to have a disability, with 91 reporting having no disability and only 1% preferring not to say. For example, in physiotherapy, 14% of physiotherapists are from an ethnic minority background, and 4% of registrants identify as LGBTQ+. And so what you can see is we do have a very, very diverse workforce, but despite this, there are still challenges within the workplace. Here's just a few quotes to also look at sort of how this looks like in practice. Even within the medical team, there was a survey of more than 2,000 doctors and students, and 90% of the respondents of this survey were from Black and Asian backgrounds, 73% of mixed ethnicity, and 64% of white respondents believed that racism was an issue within their profession. And 76% of those who surveyed said that they had been subjected to at least one incident of racist behaviour in the past 2 years, with 17% stating they experienced it regularly. Just a few more statistics just to show kind of it's not just about sort of racist incidents, but also to staff who identify as having a disability, their experiences within the workplace also differ from those who do not have a disability. And this is on the basis of experiencing harassment, bullying or abuse from managers and colleagues. They are more likely to compared to their non-disabled counterparts. So with all this in mind, I led on a quality improvement project at Imperial that looked specifically at EDI incident reporting, not only within the workforce, but had a specific focus on our student population, as we know that they are at sort of increase of it affecting their well-being because they're not permanent members in our team, and also they have the added pressure of being graded by their placement educators, which might have an input on their reporting. And we sent a survey out to all of the allied health professionals at Imperial, and what was quite evident within the survey is that most people felt very sad and shocked if they had ever witnessed an incident, but there was very varied responses in how people dealt with these types of issues. So most people wanted to educate and challenge, but what was actually happening is that 50% were just speaking amongst their colleagues, 35% reported these instances to a senior, 14% did nothing, and only 8% completed a DATEX. So if we think about the broader picture, when we're looking at incidences on a statistical level, from this survey, only 8% actually made it to a DATEX. So that's suggesting that so many more instances are actually happening. And if the workforce are inconsistent in how they deal with these issues, this sends a very mixed message to students on placement on how they could be appropriately supported within the placement setting. When we look at the types of incidents that are happening, again, the highest proportion of EDI incidents that were occurring were around race. So what we wanted to do with this, we took this one step forward in creating an EDI incident reporting workshop to champion making it everyone's business to report EDI instances within the workplace, whether they are something that's happened to you or taking a more bystander approach and reporting it if it's something that you have witnessed. We believe that if we increase incident reporting around these issues, it gives us a better chance to lobby the people at the top to actually make some actionable change to support staff well-being in these situations. We also wanted to consider the other spectrum of sort of incident reporting. So whilst we were encouraging everyone to report these DATEXs, we also approached people of managerial level and placement educators to champion how support could be improved for those who these incidences are reported to, because what we didn't want to happen is that we were promoting people to report instances, but managers and placement educators felt unprepared to actually make supportive change to what was being reported. And then we obviously wanted to share our learning with wider stakeholders as well. So just a quick update on what the EDI incident reporting workshop looks like. There is some kind of theoretical background that forms part of the workshop. We also make it very statistical focused, so we take pre and post confidence level of participants in their confidence for not only identifying issues within the workplace, but also their confidence to report it. And we use real life scenario group discussions to explore how people feel, explore the barriers to incident reporting, and then create a co-production workspace so that people can discuss how they feel the trust can appropriately support them when EDI instances may occur. It's just to say that the workshop has been carried out by many different staff members, so with allied health professionals, support staff, nursing and midwifery, and also allied health professional students as well. The key findings from the workshop suggested that most people stated that they hadn't actually ever witnessed an EDI incident. But if we think back to some of those other quotes, people are reporting that they frequently experience this in the workplace. So there is a question is, do people not actually witness EDI instances in the workplace, or are they not recognizing what that might look like? And again, when we look at what people do about these types of instances, again, some people are saying that they never witnessed, but if they do witness, most people, again, are discussing it amongst their colleagues, and the smaller percentage are actually completing a DATEX. People often reported that they felt very unclear what to do when they came faced with an EDI incident. They felt unsure how to deal with it, and they felt very awkward about talking about it. And that is some of the barriers to supporting people to feel comfortable with this type of incident reporting. We all feel very comfortable with reporting falls. When it comes to these sort of topics, those kind of emotions of feeling awkward can often be a barrier. Just some of the outcomes of the workshop that we have run so far. Some of the barriers, again, were reporting patients and feeling that it's not going to make a difference, or fear of regression. And in particular, there was a lot of discussion around reporting vulnerable patients, such as those with dementia and mental health disorders. People felt that there was a grey area around the policy. So whilst policy suggests that there's zero tolerance, people didn't feel that they could enforce it with these types of patients, and wanted clearer guidance on the process and how to react in these situations. So again, that comes nicely onto the process. The process felt like it was very unclear, and there was a lot of ambiguity over sort of what was done. And they also felt that ward pressures could sometimes get in the way of incident reporting. And there were also emotional barriers. So as I mentioned before, feeling very awkward. There was this big question of professionalism. when we kind of are faced with discrimination in the workplace, how do you balance that with maintaining your professionalism? It's not only between sort of staff and patients, but also there were instances between different staff groups, and people felt more awkward or less likely to report an incident if it was against one of their colleagues. There were also, we did a co-production reflection to suggest how could things be improved to support well-being, and a lot of that was around the environment, so creating a safe space to report back, and also making that process a lot clearer. There was also a lot of comments around increasing emotional support, so whether that was linking them in with the contact team, and having a positive feedback pathway so they didn't feel like they were reporting and not hearing anything back and nothing was being done. And also more development of training and support tools. Some people suggested that simulation training with actors could be useful in overcoming those barriers, in knowing how to kind of react in the moment, and then also sort of being more aware of what was already available within the trust. Again, like I mentioned, we did do some workshop that focused on managerial and placement educator focus. Again, a lot of managers and educators suggested that they had not had any instances reported to them. And again, just to remind us that actually what we do know is that instances are happening and not necessarily being reported. Placement educators and managers suggested that they felt that there was inadequate training at the time on how to deal with these incidences, particularly around the placement educator training that previously was happening. They felt that they didn't delve deep enough into these types of issues to know how to be supported in how to respond. They also thought that it could be useful to have some experts, so for example, a champion, and also the development of resources that they could pull on to support them once incidences had been reported to them. So just a kind of an update on how the workshop is going. What we found is that after the workshop, people self-reported an increase in confidence in identifying and reporting EDI incidences. And just to finish off with just a case study to demonstrate that actually something that kind of happened personally to me. It was an EDI incident that happened on the ward, and it was with a patient who did have a cognitive impairment. Part of incident reporting is that we share learning, and it's the hope that the more we report these incidences and the more they get investigated by the investigator, we can actually seek out positive learning points and also learning points from these instances that we can share between teams to build up some like a toolbox of resources on how to respond when these instances happen. So for example, in the one that happened for me, what was very key is having a very MDT approach to dealing with this incident, so making sure that we're supporting all members of the NDT, including the nursing staff. We involved a psychologist to help set behavioural guidelines as well. There was also, when we did the Datex actually in our trust, it linked us in with Contact and with the security team. And actually we were able to use Contact to support with a staff debrief afterwards, which staff found very, very useful. And so it's just to kind of highlight that actually if you do experience an EDI incident on placement, it's, you know, not only can you speak to your placement team, please speak to your placement educators or any staff member within your team. If you don't feel they're being supportive, please escalate this to your placement team. But also, particularly within Imperial, students have access to all the resources within the trust. So for example, at Imperial, we have BAME ambassadors and Freedom to Speak Up guardians and all of the networks as well. And you would be open to being able to contact the Contact team if you needed. And that's all for me. I hope you all enjoyed.
Thanks very much for that, Simone. So we'll come to questions for Simone afterwards. So if you'd just like to put any questions for Simone in the Q&A box after the third presentation, we'll come to all questions. So our next presentation is called Bridging the Gap to Leadership, Working Collaboratively with Students and External Partners to Tackle Racial Inequalities in Practice Learning, by Dr. Shani Clark, Head of Practice, Learning and Development at the University of Brighton, and Maria Rule and Bartholomew Chua, occupational therapy students from Canterbury Christ Church University. Okay.
Thanks, Kalima. Hannah, are you okay with the slides? Because I know there's nothing like a last-minute stress when you can't get in as a panelist. Is that all okay for you to move? Right, that's brilliant. So you'll be okay to work that as we go through. Brilliant, thank you. So thank you for inviting us to share the work that we've been doing at the University of Brighton and Canterbury Christ Church. So as Kalima said, I'm Shani Clark and I'm the Head of Practice, Learning and Development at the School of Sport and Health Sciences. I am an occupational therapist and part of the occupational therapy team here with our OT courses. But I'm very much here this evening presenting with Marie and Bart, who are just about to finish in the final semester, I think, aren't you, Marie and Bart, occupational therapy students from Canterbury Christ Church, who are two of the over 30 students that we've now had on this Bridging the Gap to Leadership placement. And that is also run in conjunction with Sarah Jane Ryan, Mary McKindy and Helen Carr from Canterbury Christ Church. I think Helen's also in the audience today, so she'll be able to chip in as well. So if you want to just move on to the next slide, I'll just give you a little bit of an overview about what I'm hoping to cover. I think probably there's a slight lag in terms of moving and what I can see, but the idea this evening was to share with you what the project is, where it's come from, and how we came to come together as two HEIs in terms of collaborating, to think a little bit about what resources the students have created, how we've done that, what type of model this placement is, and how we've worked with the students very much as partners in this learning and working with our external partners. And just thinking a little bit, Marie and Bart are going to share with you some of the leadership knowledge and skills and attributes that they feel that they've created and that other students have felt that this leadership opportunity has provided for them. So before I move on, just to give you a little bit of background to where Bridging the Gap came from. So a bit like Simone was talking about in her presentation, both HEIs were having discussions pretty much simultaneously with students, our Black, Asian and mixed heritage and minority ethnic students, that were reporting incidences of racism, discrimination, microaggressions, but were coming to us at the end of their course and saying that actually this had been happening to them quite frequently throughout their placements, but they had been really anxious about raising that, the power differential between them and their educators, being seen as troublemakers, being told actually you're being oversensitive. So they were not having very good positive experiences when they were raising their concerns, and so they were tending to be silent. And then were coming to us as placement tutors, as I say, to hand that over to us pretty much at the end of their course, when it was quite difficult to then go back and actually address that with the educators at that time. And because both Brighton and Canterbury are within that southeast region, we share a number of our practice partners. And so when we were in this sort of meeting where this came to light, we thought actually rather than two HEIs doing what normally happens, which is being in competition with each other, reinventing the same resources and processes, that this was a really prime opportunity for us to work collaboratively to try and bring about a cultural change in terms of the way that our Black, Asian and mixed heritage minority ethnic students are supported out in placement. So I contacted Health Education England and said to them, was there any funding to be able to support this placement idea? And they said, yeah, we've got a call out and it closes at 5 o'clock this evening. So we quickly put a bid together and got some initial funding from HEE originally to provide placements for 12 students. That was back in January 21, so we're coming up to 2 years, and we've well exceeded that. I think we're currently on about our 32nd student that are currently with us at the moment, so we far exceeded what we set out to achieve. So if I could move on to the next slide, if I can then just summarise what the main aims of this placement were. So we got 3 main aims. One was really to help bridge that attainment gap for this community cohort of students in higher education. We know from statistics that this group of students often score lower on placements than their white counterparts, and that they not only experience that on placement, but that also manifests itself in terms of their degree that they get awarded. So we really wanted to try and help to bridge that attainment gap for these students. We really wanted to start to develop a toolkit or some resources for practice educators on how they could better support our Black, Asian, mixed heritage and minority ethnic students on placement, to really try and raise awareness about what some of the challenges are that these students experience, and how they can become active bystanders and allies. And importantly, we really wanted this placement to be a leadership opportunity. So thinking about our 4 pillars of practice, we wanted to provide that leadership experience for this group of students to really help them reflect on their own leadership styles, their own leadership skills, to give them opportunities, like it says there, to develop their presentation skills, thinking about what their career pathways might look like in non-clinical roles, and to really give them the opportunity to work alongside us as our team members, managing a team and their projects. And the overall aim of that is to really try and help us to decolonise the professions. Predominantly, we've got occupational therapy and physiotherapy students with us, but we have also had some nursing students, and actually we would open it to any of our students that are within our 2 HEIs. To provide that opportunity. So if you want to just move on to the next slide. So this is a remote placement. So it happens, well, it can vary. So we can have students on placement with us for 6 weeks. We can have, I think Marie and Bart, you were 10 weeks. We've got one that's with us for 5 weeks. So it's a range of placement weeks. A normal, typical placement is that they're with us all day, every day for that week, but we would meet with them for half an hour at the beginning of the day for them to set objectives, to think about what their project is, and then we would support them in linking them in with different stakeholders that they would need to meet with. But this really is a collaborative in its truest sense, in terms of this is led by the students. So whilst you've got 4 of us academics that are there to facilitate and support and supervise, and yes, we have to do the assessment form, this is a placement that is led by the students right from the get-go. So the 2 students that started from Canterbury, they created the name for the placement. They decided that Bridging the Gap to Leadership was the name that this project should have. And then I think the next 2 students then set about thinking, well, what's our identity? What's our logo going to be? And they created this logo, which is about that sort of allyship, bridging the gap to leadership, trying to bring in that allyship between the white students and our Black, Asian, minority ethnic students, as well as our white and our Black, Asian and minority ethnic educators. So they created the logo, which you will see on our Twitter pages, our Instagram pages, yeah, all our social media, and is on all of our resources. So I will just hand over, I think, to Marie, who will just start to give you a little bit of a flavour about what some of the resources are. We haven't got time to share them all with you today, but we're hoping to give you a flavour of what the resources are that the students have created. Are you there, Marie?
Hi, yeah. Hi, I'm Marie. I'm a 3rd year occupational therapy student at Canterbury Christchurch University. I was on the Bridging the Gap to Leadership placement for my 2nd year placement, and I was on it alongside Bart for 10 weeks. It was a great experience, but I was wondering if we could go to the next slide so I can just show you some of the resources that we've got. So yeah, here's some examples of posters that the students created on the placements. These posters have been utilised for Black, Asian, mixed heritage and minority ethnic students' experiences, and they really highlight some important issues that need addressing, and also issues that were faced during their placements. As you can see, there's a poster here that highlights how a student's name should not be shortened without permission or not mispronounced, because obviously that frustrates students. There's one there about microaggressions and one about allyship. You can find these posters on the Canterbury Christchurch University Edu blog and also University of Brighton blog. There's a lot of other resources that have been made by the students. There's posters, videos, some of which we'll show you, leaflets, and there's a great Prezi presentation, a new one, that shares information about religious festivals and how to support students who may want to celebrate this while they're on their placements. All of the resources on both blogs can be downloaded and shared amongst your teams, so feel free to do that. I'll pass on to Art now for the next slide.
Hello. Hello, my name is Bart. I'm going to talk about a video created by a student from Hong Kong. He did while he was in the quarantine in a hotel. The video talk about some situations about microaggressions. So to make people aware of the language they use and the way they behave with people from different backgrounds. And you can use this in your presentation to make students or staff to reflect about their behavior. And Shanine is going to show a little bit of this video so you can see a bit more.
Yes, so thank you, Bart. So Hannah, I don't think we've got time to play it all, but maybe if you could just play the first couple of minutes just to give people a flavour. So these, just to say that these are real case studies of experiences that the students unfortunately have experienced on placement. So maybe if we just play the first couple of case studies and then Hannah, you can stop it.
This video provides educators with resources to provide an inclusive environment for students. This included 3 real case scenarios of microaggression, followed by questions for educator discussion. Case Scenario 1. Afeni is a student on his break. He sat in the dining room with 2 other female British staff. He brought out his lunch. Immediately the 2 British women started laughing and looking weirdly at him. They kept laughing continuously and murmuring some words to themselves. One staff left and he came to ask about this.
Why were you both laughing at me?
Oh, you were eating bananas and ground nuts.
What is wrong with what I was eating?
Kelly said that monkeys will eat bananas and ground nuts. As you were eating them, Kelly was saying you look like a monkey.
Afeni became embarrassed and disappointed. He left the dining room. This is not the first time he faces negative remarks which irritated him for the last 3 weeks. He could not feel comfortable working here again. He reported it to his educator and his educator suggested an afternoon leave to rest. Here are the questions for educators' discussion. Case Scenario 2. Karen is a BSc student with a dyslexia background. And she worked hard and used her way to adapt to her learning. She has a pleasant character and gets on well with team members and patients. She is talkative except topic about her girlfriend. At one time, she was shadowing a band 6 staff Susan. The patient was talking about his social history.
My back is so painful. My partner will help me to do groceries now because of the pain.
Oh, so you need your girlfriend taking the heavy bags.
Actually, I married my husband and he is strong enough for that.
After seeing that patient, Susan was saying,
Oh my God, he is gay, and he is middle-aged. What on earth is happening in this world now?
Here are the Karen's thought.
I don't want to be judged and get marked down because of my sexuality. What if she hates me after coming out? I need to face her for 5 more weeks. I felt more comfortable hiding instead of being who I am here.
Here are the questions for educators' discussion.
Thanks, Hannah.
Case scenario 3. Daisy is a student.
Thank you. So that gives you a little flavour of the type of resource out of that video and some of the, well, very distressing stories that the students have reported. Do you want to just move on to the next slide? Bart Marie, are you going to introduce this one? This is yours.
Yeah. So during our time on the placement, myself, Bart, and 2 other physio students from Brighton explored how speaking English as a second language can have an impact on students' placement experience. So altogether, we conducted a survey to gather the Black, Asian, mixed heritage and minority ethnic healthcare students' perspectives and to find out their experiences of speaking English as a second language during placement. We shared this between the 2 universities and shared it on Twitter as well. We've got some really interesting information on their experiences that they faced on placement, as well as how they feel they could be better supported. So yeah, we utilised this information along with some literature and some research we've done to create this video for practice educators. So we'll play 2 minutes of this for you now, just because of time, but you can watch the rest by accessing the blog. So yeah, if we can just play a couple of minutes, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Our aim is to provide practice educators with students' perspective about engaging in placement when English is their second language. We will highlight difficulties faced by students and how you can help address this challenge with them. ESL is a term used to refer to individuals who are learning or speaking English as an additional language in addition to their native language. What is CORE? CORE means culturally and linguistically diverse. CORE students accompany people who have a unique cultural and linguistic background compared to the dominant culture in the location where they reside. Acculturation, or cultural adjustment, is defined as a process of cultural contact and exchange, where a person or a group adopts certain values and practice of a culture that is not originally their own. For example, everyone greets each other in different ways. Some behaviors in certain countries can be considered rude or inappropriate, while in others might be considered as normal or polite. According to Moiter et al. 2015, CORE students have often chosen to study in the UK. This has added positive cultural contribution, such as bringing exposure to the cultural beliefs, bringing different perspectives to the workforce. However, students can be faced barriers, which needed to be adjusted and talked about. Atru and McAllister and Link in 2016 has stated that ESL and acculturation are significant.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you. And people are putting in there about us copying in the links. These are all available on YouTube and they're on our blog. So as soon as I finish this presentation, I'll find the links and I'll pop them into the chat. So that's exactly what we want people to be doing. We don't want everybody else reinventing these resources. We want you to use them and share them. And we want you to feed back to us so that we can measure the impact and the outcome of this. So should we just move on to the last few slides?
Hello. I'm just going to talk about the impact on students from diverse backgrounds. Here you can see some quotes from the students who participate of the project. In my case, I think it was really good the fact I was sharing lived experience when we used the survey, I could see some situations I had with myself, and it was quite comforting to be in a place where I could see I wasn't alone. And from this lived experience, we can create tools to help practice educators to support the diverse background students. And another thing is exchange experience with students from a different university and different course. So as a good example of collaborative work, learn new skills, for example, develop presentation skills in a different format, use new tools like Canva. And in the end, we create an article, me, Marie, and Janine, which was in the OT News in October. So it was very positive, of the experience. Now you can go for the next slide, please.
Hi. Yeah, so this slide shows some comments from white students who have been on the placement, and it reflects on them gaining a better perspective and how students have learned to be better ally and role models for creating change. I feel like I can relate to these comments, reflecting upon my time during the placement. I have been able to gain a better cultural perspective through formal and informal conversation with those who I was on placement with. I can take this forward as an OT in practice, and I feel like I can also better support students that I may be practice educated for. So yeah, I have gained knowledge on how to be a better ally and be an active bystander if I ever witness microaggression or discrimination. And I feel that I'm better able to support my peers and my colleagues and also friends in my personal life to deal with situations if they occurred. So yeah, I learned how to work autonomously. I was quite worried about going on to a virtual placement and I've always been quite an active doer. So yeah, it made me quite nervous. But, I learned how to work autonomously and manage my workload within the day. And it really improved my time management skills and my organisational skills. And as Bart mentioned before, it was a great opportunity to be able to write an article for OT News. And it was a proud moment for us all. It was mine and Bart's first piece of published writing. So that was great. I feel like it's brought out my confidence, this placement as well, so much. I've been nervous to speak up and share my opinions in the past. And I never would have done this presentation beforehand. But yeah, I feel like I'm really appreciative of this experience and being able to do this presentation now. And I can now see that my opinions and matter too. So yeah, and I'll pass on to Nina.
That's great. That's great. And yeah, I think if we'd asked Marie and Bart to present this at the beginning of their placement, they'd have run a mile. And now look at them. I'm so proud. So just on the last couple of slides. So the last one here is just about the impact on some of the feedback we've had from the practice partners in terms of when they came along and listened to a webinar where in the early days where some of the resources were being shared. Again, just some of the impact that it's having out on our practice educators, which is great to see. And then just on that final slide, I just then thought, well, actually, let's just have a look at how this placement opportunity maps against these new principles. So when I was going through them all, it was evident that it clearly does. You know, it is, as I said, a really, in its truest sense, a co-produced placement with the students that addresses that leadership pillar, the education pillar. They're here today presenting. They've done a number of presentations when they were with us for 6 and 10 weeks. They were with us. It's all about inclusivity and creating that sense of belonging. us being flexible, as Bart said, that video was created by CK, who was in a hotel with COVID during the pandemic in Hong Kong, and we were still able, despite the time differences, to create a fantastic resource. So yeah, I just wanted to finish with that. And then on that final slide just says, please contact any of us at any time, and we will be able to put you in contact with our student partners as well. Do the slides get sent out? Because the links are on the websites are there, but I'll find them now and I'll pop them into the chat for you. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you for that. Really interesting. Yeah, so the slides and the videos eventually will be made available on the RCOT website that people could download as well. But if Shani, if you'd just like to put the links to the blogs in the site, because I think some people have been asking for that in the chat as well for those resources. Okay, so thank you for that. So we've got the next presentation. So as we go along, if you'd just like to put any questions and comments in the Q&A boxes, and we'll get to those after the third presentation. So we have a final presentation, developing resources for just, equitable and inclusive practice placements. Sorry, what's happened to my, inclusive practice placements, a fireside chat with OT at Brunel. And we've got the presenters here. So there's 5 presenters on the list, but they're today presenting will be Shahrazad Kapadia, Sydney Lai and Winnie Chan, and Joyen Teo and Carolyn Conard aren't available today, but the 3 of them will be presenting this presentation on behalf of the group. Right. It's time to start. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Kalima, for the introduction. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting us. So just to give a little bit more introduction about ourselves, we were all previously OT students at Brunel, and we're all graduated now and currently working as OTs. But this has been a project that we have been involved with the faculty, so mainly Joanne and Carolyn. So we're very happy to present about it today. So the first part will focus on students' experiences of racial prejudice and discrimination on practice placement, which will be presented by myself. It will be followed by a presentation of race-based type 2 workplace violence by Shahrazad, and we'll finish with a few questions that Sherry will ask me and Winnie as well. So if Winnie, could you move to the next slide for me?
I think I still don't have access to it yet.
Yeah, sorry, the next slide. Yeah, so can you go back one slide? I think you went back a bit far. Oh, I'm not sure. I think this is not the right slide. Sorry, could you just go a bit further? The page doesn't seem to be there. Could you go one more? Yeah, okay, we'll just go with this one. So this section kind of features data extracted from a bigger study where findings were used to co-produce anti-racist and inclusive learning for occupational therapy. So we conducted 2 focus groups with 11 students in total, with 5 of Black heritage and 6 of Asian. And we found that prejudice and discrimination on practice placement was a key issue affecting students of racially minoritized backgrounds. So when we conducted thematic analysis of the data on this topic, we realized that our findings align with the categories of prohibited conduct in the 2010 Equality Act, and students have reported experience harassment by service users, the team on placement, as well as placement educators. So quite a few of these experiences are pretty straightforward. And also our students reported examples of educational discrimination, where they felt that they were treated less favorably compared to others on a basis of racial background. Students also spoke extensively about language discrimination, so quite similar to what Marie and Bart mentioned, where they were treated less favorably compared to others on the basis of language. So one example shared during the focus group was that a student who grew up in a rougher part of London reported that the word hooligan was used to describe them because they expressed themselves differently to social norms of what might be perceived as professional and polite in that placement venue. However, language is not a protected characteristic under the 2010 Equality Act, so this was a factor we needed to take into consideration when developing our resources. Students also spoke about challenges to reporting. They were unclear about the processes involved. They were not sure whether what they experienced was an incident that should be reported. So, for example, a case where racist behavior could be potentially a result of pathology, and whether they could experience any repercussions, so known as victimization under the 2010 Equality Act. Finally, we also identified some gray areas of social exclusion and inaction as a response to reports, which we thought would be interesting to discuss with you and our audience. So when we were producing the resources, we realized that conduct could be classified as harassment under the 2010 Equality Act and had a very specific definition. So apparently, harassment can refer to unwanted conduct related to relevant protected characteristics that firstly violate dignity, and secondly create an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. Also, harassment does not necessarily have to be intentional, and the perception of the person experiencing and receiving the harassment would be needed to be taken into account. So there's this book called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in a Cafeteria? And it's quite a good place to start to understand how people can unintentionally create an environment which is, as described earlier, intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive. So our question to the audience is that does gray areas of unintentional social exclusion and inaction in response to reports contributes to this sort of unfriendly environment? So would this count as a form of harassment, or how would you perceive it? So we'll be very interested to hear what you think in the chat. And moving on, we'll have Sherry speaking about it. Winnie, if you could go back one slide.
Thank you, Sydney. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So following that, we also conducted a critical incident study where an online questionnaire was used to collect Black and Asian occupational therapy practitioner and students' experiences of type 2 workplace violence in practice settings. So type 2 workplace violence is when violence is enacted from a client or a patient towards an employee. So in this case, Black and Asian occupational therapy practitioners and students. The findings from this study expand the depth of ones described before by focusing specifically on type 2 workplace violence, which is perpetuated by service users, and also encompasses family members, guardians, and other people external to the work organization. 10 people participated. Through a thematic analysis process, we learned that our findings were very much in alignment with the analytical framework of critical race theory. They highlight how racism in the UK affects Black and Asian occupational therapy practitioners and students at the intrapersonal, interpersonal, and institutional level. At an intrapersonal level, many participants reported a conflict between their duty as occupational therapy practitioners and students to provide personal-centered care and their right to be protected from abuse. And this related to critical race theory tenet of how racial experiences are socially constructed, particularly in terms of the relationship between the person on the receiving end of racism and the person perpetuating it. Participants also reported how racism persisted as an everyday part of their interpersonal interactions, and how it intersects with other protective characteristics that they might embody, such as gender or religion. These findings align with critical race theory tenets of intersectionality and pervasiveness of racism, and were important to take into consideration in terms of the development of our resources. Finally, similar to the study discussed earlier, participants also reported inaction to their efforts to raise concern. Interpreted against critical race theory, in the context of this study, we have identified this as an institutional failing due to a lack of interest conversion. Based on our participants' experience, inaction towards racism is often accompanied by other actions. These additional actions indicate that as far as the organization's interests are concerned, ensuring that business is able to go on as usual and treatment plans are completed are of a higher priority than eradicating racism. And there is no convergence between the interest of the organization and the interest of racially minoritized people, racism will continue to persist. Actions taken by managers, as reported by our participants, were primarily focused on closing the case so the cogs could keep turning without any expression of care for the well-being of practitioners and students on the receiving end of racism, or further preventative measures considered. This is discussed in critical race theory as perceived closure, whereby the organization considers the case to be closed, but there is no closure for the person on the receiving end of racism. Through the approach of counter-storytelling, also another tenet of critical race theory, both studies have put the experience of racially minoritized persons in the front and center and revealed insights which were helpful for the development of resources to address prejudice and discrimination in practice placements. We will now move on to the next segment where we discuss the development of these resources from the perspectives of the students. So question 1 for Sydney and Winnie is, what was your personal motivation for deciding to be involved in developing these resources?
Okay, I can go first. So I think firstly, a very big reason for me for participating is that I identify as a BAME person in this country. And I think I've often found myself in situations where I was unsure of how to seek assistance when I experience a racist, like a discrimination or clarification when I'm not sure whether an issue or experience was considered discrimination. And also just not just for myself, I think it is important to create a safe environment for my fellow OT students and colleagues to be able to learn comfortably in their placement without fear of discrimination from their own team, which they should be learning from. So going to placement is a daunting task in itself, and having to experience discrimination on top of it will definitely add to the anxiety and the stress of learning. So they should be learning from a team and not be fearful from it. So I think being part of it kind of empowers and motivates me. It's my main motivation, I would say.
Yeah, I think really good answer. And what about you, Winnie? What was your sort of personal motivation?
My personal motivation is that because quite a few of my friends, they do kind of experience discrimination, or I kind of feel like it sounds like discrimination, but I'm not so sure about that. And this project definitely just gives me a better sense, or even like a more in-depth understanding, because in our education, we always talk about equality, engaging everyone, you're trying to include everyone, but then we don't actually know when it happens, how can we help others? Or even if I wanted to raise this issue, how can I do so? Or as a student, what should I do? And so I think it's really important to kind of help in developing all these resources, and also especially from a student, just because I've just graduated, and just from a student perspective, what are we expecting from the help? And so I just thought being part of the project is really beneficial in the future, no matter in the future, not only helping my colleagues, myself, and also like the future students that would be working with me or my team.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. So our second question is, what have you learned from developing these resources, and how do you think this experience has shaped the way you will respond to discriminatory experiences moving forward? So Sydney, maybe back to you.
Yeah, so just to answer the first question, I think the most important thing that I learned is using legislation to protect myself, because I think we learn a lot in our regular academic curriculum in terms of legislations to care for our clients. So it could be the Mental Health Act, for example. So it's quite refreshing to use this legislation for ourselves in this case. So for the second question of how it shaped how I respond in the future, I think it gave me the confidence to protect myself, because I am now more well-equipped and better prepared. I know my own rights. And as someone that's more action-driven as well, I think it's very helpful that I have very clear and concrete steps that I can take to protect my rights.
Wonderful. And you're right, there's definitely a lot of merit in familiarizing ourselves with policies and legislations that can protect us. And it's a good preventative sort of measure. And what about yourself, Winnie?
I have similar thoughts with Sydney, but at the same time, I think what also I learned from it is that it's more, apart from like knowing the policy, it's also like knowing the routes that I could advocate for myself or my colleagues. And that's really important, because not only I know that the policy can back me up, but also I know what I should be doing. And I think the action part is really helped me, because in the past when I learned about the legislation, I know what that could protect us, but then now I also know what's the further step that actually these actions can help me with it. And I think that in the future, it's just really helping me and also raising my awareness in terms of like when I spotted any of these incidences happening, and then I can just go straight into reporting it instead of like just staying silent or thinking of like, oh, how can I help this person or who I can escalate to. So I think that's really changed my practice.
Wonderful. Yeah. So similar to Sydney, but then taking it that one step further as well by putting things into action and knowing what you can do. So last question is, what is one key message you have for stakeholders in our profession as far as addressing prejudice and discrimination on practice placements is concerned?
Okay, so for me, I think that OT is a profession that is concerned with promoting our clients' right to engage in meaningful occupations to promote their well-being and health. So I think it's time for us to apply the same principle to ourselves, to those within the professions, which includes the practicing OTs and students on placements. So for us being able to work, being able to engage in our placement, being able to learn are all meaningful occupations and activities. So we should be empowered to be able to continue to engage in them in a safe and comfortable way and be given equitable and fair opportunity to learn in this environment as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well said. And what about you, Winnie?
I think my key message would be to all the stakeholders is that we are well equipped to face all these situations, and we should definitely know about our rights and how we could escalate all these, and don't just only read all the resources but not doing any actions. Just definitely take your action, be bold to do it. That's my main message.
Yeah, and I think both of you are touching on the point of we need to prioritize action, and that can be hard given how busy our jobs are, but there are so many resources out there. People have even made them using their own free time. These are coming from the people who are affected by the issues, and it's time we sort of put them into action and we prioritize that with fair, I guess, compensation for the people making the effort to make these practices and policies. So yeah, so thank you guys. I think that wraps up our presentation from our side.
Hi, thanks very much. Just get the slides sorted. Okay, so if everyone would like to put their cameras on, and we'll move the slides for a second. We'll just go through any questions and comments from the audience. So people can put their questions and comments in the box, in the Q&A box. Just trying to, you can just maybe remove the slides for a sec and then we'll get them back up. Yep, all right, thank you. Sorry, I was having a bit of technical issues. So, okay, so the one we have a question as well. I think Carolyn said she will answer it. It's wonder how we can reach RCOT and also have a chance to share good placement practice and pilots. And it's got the email address, experience on leadership placements in OT at Hull, Teaching Hospitals, NHS Trust. If,
Hi everyone. Yes, I clicked that and I didn't know how to undo it, but yes, I'm very happy to answer that.
Okay,
it's fine. I'm Carolyn. I work at RCOT on the pre-registration education side of things, so absolutely the right person to answer that. You can contact me. I'll put my email in the chat. That's the best way to do it. You can also always contact us via Twitter or go to our website, and there's different people to contact. But we're all always wanted to hear what people are doing, good practice. I've got a big smile on my face as Shanine mapped their placement across to our placement principles, because that's what we're wanting to do, is be able to talk about our placement principles, which every placement and every conversation today has been linked to, be it specifically or it's all there, so that we can link our resources back to that to support people to really think about the way in which you're delivering placements, recognise the great practice, give those hints and tips to other people, and then also look at how we can continue to improve and continue to grow the placements to support our learners and give them the best possible introduction we can to this lovely profession that I want to say working with us for a long time.
Okay, and there's another question. I think it's for the second presentation. It says, is the grade disparities noted based on student names? Has there been a cross-reference to students who belong to BME communities but who have English names? That was a question.
So
I think it was.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was looking at that in the chat. That's an interesting question. I mean, I think it's not necessarily done on names, because what the students report is that they are experiencing these microaggressions and prejudice when they're in the classroom, so when they're being assessed in a face-to-face session. So, you know, it might be very obvious that somebody might have a very British name, but actually might come from a different cultural or racial background. So and there's things that the universities are trying to do around sort of anonymous marking to try and iron out some of that bias that you get when you are when you've got a name in front of you. But I don't know whether there's any research that's been done around more British names versus, I know there is research around when people have done job applications, and it's the same person and you just change the name to more of a white British name, and actually the application gets shortlisted much quicker. So I'm sure there's an element of that, but this particularly is around what the students are experiencing, not just from their name, you know, but once a student passport goes in, for example, educators start to make judgments and have biases the minute they receive that information. And then there was a student that I think was talking about the fact that they arrived in the department, and the educator said to them, "Oh, you can't be this student because this person has got this name." And they said, "Yeah, that's me." And they were like, "Oh no, hang on a minute." They left them in the canteen for a good hour and a half whilst they went off and rang the university to actually authenticate whether or not that was the student. So there's definitely something around that, but there's a very inherent bias and prejudice that's coming out regardless. So it's just my thoughts about it.
Does anyone else have any comments from the other groups? No? Fine. And there's also another comment as well. Is there any questions you would suggest practice educators should ask on the first day of placement to support equality and diversity? Maybe all of you might. So maybe go to Simone first, and we just move around.
Yes, I think there are. What I do personally, students or new members of staff, we've included an equality, diversity and inclusion section on our induction paperwork. So it's part of formal induction. And I often take the first step in sort of expressing that, you know, I am an ally, and any kind of instances that people may experience on placement, I open them to either let myself know, or I also direct them to some of the third-party sort of teams within the trust, like the BAME ambassadors, etc., if they don't feel as comfortable saying it directly to me. But I make a point of highlighting that this is something that sometimes occurs within the workforce, but actually within our team, we do take a very strong zero tolerance approach, and I give those kind of sort of examples on how we can support them if they experience it. So I think sometimes it is about you stepping forward and kind of opening the door for the conversation, so it doesn't feel like the students are uncertain where you stand on these types of issues.
So almost making it like an open-in conversation, so from the beginning on the first day where they're able to come to you if there's any issues. Thanks. And Shani's team, maybe for the students, and Shani, if you want to
yeah, comment. I don't know, I mean, Bart and Marie, have you got anything that you particularly would offer as a suggestion before I chip in? What would you like educators to ask you on your first day?
Yeah, I feel like having the passport where you can share your information with the practice educators beforehand, I think that's really sort of useful to have. And also sort of practice educators to support the students, like Simone was just saying a minute ago, sort of bring that up in the induction. And so, because sometimes students find it hard to start the conversation, and sometimes practice educators, I know that it's been said in a few sessions, practice education sessions, that they don't know how to approach the student, but just to openly start the conversation, I think that's helpful.
Another thing I think would be useful, maybe talk about the previous experience the student had on placements. So maybe the barriers the person had in the previous placement, so to be able to work on this the new placement.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. It's really about creating that sense of belonging right from the beginning. So having, picking up, as Simone said, picking up the information that either the student's already given them in the placement passport, opening up that conversation. But we're also trying to say to our educators, please just don't tell a student that there's a equality diversity policy and it's there to have a look at. Please actively, like Simone's saying, talk about being an ally, get them a time to meet with the Speak Up guardians or whoever is the ambassadors in the department, so those people can really reiterate. Because even though students say to me, oh yeah, I knew there was a policy, I didn't know who the person was, and I just thought I wouldn't be listened to. You've got to bring that policy to life for the student and make them feel part of that team right from the get-go.
Okay. And Shahrazad and Sydney, any comments?
Yeah, so I think the most pertinent one for me is kind of what Shani's just touched upon. It's that I think when we have these conversations at the beginning of placements, and I've had many myself, it's more of a tick box for your educator to say X, Y, and Z, as opposed to them embodying this. Policy is one thing, but culture, organizational culture, is where you see anti-racism. And it goes back, critical race theory talks about interest conversion. Are we saying that there's an EDI policy just so we tick a box and we make sure students know it was there, so if anything happens, the organization has done their bit? Or are we saying it because we actually want to tackle anti-racism and we don't believe it's something people on placement should be having to deal with when it's already a stressful environment? So I think that conversation is so much more than a conversation. It's about embodying the values. It's about proving that in your words, in your behaviors. And if you're not doing that, it doesn't mean anything. I remember someone telling me when I was on a placement in Bromley that, oh, it's really racist in Bromley, so make sure you're familiar with the EDI policy. And that just didn't do anything for me. I was like, this is we've gone 10 steps back. We haven't actually gone 2 steps forward. So I 100% think we've got to, marry up policy and culture in those initial conversations.
Sydney?
Yeah, just to add on as well. So I think when we were talking about the resources that we developed as a team, I think it was shared that most of the students shared that being signposted within the very first meeting during their placement educator is actually really helpful, because sometimes they feel like, oh, the person that perpetuated the harassment or the discrimination is really close to their placement educator and they don't feel empowered, or the placement educator might not be able to help as much just because they have not been on the receiving end. It's not the fault of the placement educator at all. So actually being signposted to ambassadors within the team or working groups like specific to LGBTQ+, for example, has been very effective. In fact, one of our students a year below us used this advice. They were in a particular placement and they weren't being referred to by the right pronouns. So first we discussed it with the placement team from the school and they tried to correct it, but it's quite difficult from the school to correct it just because they're not directly involved at the hospital where they're based at. So they then went to reach out to the working groups, and it's there that the working group was able to come up with an intervention for the entire OT team to be educated on why it's right to refer to someone by the right pronouns. So this is very beneficial for clients as well. So I think this is some of the things that a practice educator could consider or to suggest when they first speak to their students.
Okay, so it's using maybe the all the affinity groups within the trust or the organisation that they're based in as well for extra support. I think Simone had obviously mentioned that in the beginning as well. Sorry, Winnie, anything to add?
I guess the only thing that I want to add is that maybe it would be worth for the educators just to highlight some of the policies or like some scenarios that students may come across, just to let them have the awareness that if they are experiencing or they spotted anything happening on their placement, then they could also be an advocate, because it's not only the educator themselves should be also involved in this, but also being an ally, but everyone should be in part of it. So it's just like highlighting to the students, because sometimes students are unaware of this. And also, even if you tell them there is a policy, sometimes students just really overwhelmed at the beginning of the placement. And so it's good to just to highlight to them some of these policies or some scenarios that they may just be aware of.
Yeah, okay, thanks. And there's another question. It says, really interesting answers, thank you. Totally agree that the PE should initiate and be active, not just say, let me know what you need. What was the term used in CRT that Shahrazad mentioned, please? There was a term that you used. I'm not sure if you want to.
Yeah, it's called interest conversion. So it's when organizations,
okay.
yeah, I've replied below. So
okay, so I didn't realize, I didn't see that. It's just sort of coming in, people writing in the comments and the chat as well. So another one, it says, really impressed with the work of all the students presented today. Well done. This is 100% proves that students have brilliant capacity, ability to develop practices and showcase challenging and changing our culture. And who perceives students as additional pressure. Yeah, which obviously students aren't additional pressures, and they can help with obviously your services and developing, and also you can learn from students as well. So I think there's another one saying, I'd be interested to know if any of the students with English as a second language ended up being an asset on placement due to their native language, if this has changed the atmosphere. I don't know if anyone has any comments. I'm not sure if the person means in terms of what translating, or that's just my interpretation.
I can certainly pick up. I mean, sorry, Sydney, you go.
Sorry, Shanine. Yeah, I think I can answer this very briefly. I don't think it applies to me entirely, because the team I worked with was wonderful and I didn't ever felt that I was discriminated against. And also, English isn't my second language, but I do speak another language fluently, which is Mandarin. So I think how I helped with the placement is that they needed an interpreter for Mandarin and Cantonese, and I was fluent in both of them. So that's how I got involved. And I think they were very grateful for it, because it was a very complex placement, and having a formal interpreter wouldn't quite be right as well, because it would kind of affect the dynamics of the interaction with the client and with the family members, and that would also then affect the intervention and the report that we had with that particular client. And I could then affect my team, but I affected the physio's team. Like, I think the student feedback to me, who was involved in that case as well, that it really changed how they were perceived and how they were treated within that team. So I think I thought it's just something that I could share.
Okay. Shani, just looking at time.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, one of the things that we're really trying to promote is that move away from people thinking about it as a deficit to it being an asset. You know, the students with English as a second language bring so much richness to our practice and to our service users and to teams, and people need to really acknowledge that and embrace that and to welcome that, rather than immediately people going, oh no, this is going to be harder work. You know, we've got a student that's got English as a second language, which at the moment, unfortunately, is the messages that the students are hearing. So yeah, that by promoting it, we've got to shift that mindset and way of thinking about, well, not just English as a second language, but all these experiences that the student group are having in terms of what actually the richness that they can bring.
Yeah. Okay, and I think some of them are comments in the chat as well, so I'm not sure. So people just commenting on the resources and also saying that they should be included on practice educator placement that someone's recently been on and it wasn't covered. So obviously these things need to be included in practice education training as well, I think at universities as well. And I think they're agreeing with Simone's approach as well, is start the conversation first on the first day. And yeah, and just there's more comments really. So is there anything else that you wanted to say to kind of wrap up? Because we've just got a couple minutes before we just get to the end. Anything from the students? Well, you're not students anymore, I think, aren't you? You're all qualified now. So anything, obviously, from your learning experiences and that you found obviously moving. So I'll just ask you really, so you're looking at these resources, do you think there's room for to build on this for other students to continue? So I'll go with Shani's team first, where they can be developed. Are you constantly looking at developing them, or is the project finished? Or
no, the project's not finished. We've got continuation of funding, so we are continuing to move forward. We've got another 5 students that are with us currently that are looking at putting proposals together for how we're going to measure the impact of it, and students that are currently looking at cost of living impact on this group of students, the cost of living crisis. I mean, students that also, this sort of intersectionality of also having caring responsibilities, students that might also have learning support plans. Now, this is a huge, I mean, this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of trying to raise awareness of this. So for as long as we've got students that want to do the placement, we'll be providing it.
Okay. And in terms of Shahrazad and Winnie and Sydney, is there any further work with, I know you're all qualified now, is there any further work, do you know, with the university or other students?
I'm not entirely sure what other work we do, but we're still finishing up the resources that we're developing, and we're hoping that I think the aim is for it to be incorporated formally into academic curriculum. So it's kind of like a pebble pack kind of video that everyone has to watch before they go on placement. So the information is there and is accessible, and they're all put in bite size. So whatever part that they are not sure of, they can just go straight there instead of having to go through so much learning resources. So I think it's just our way of making it accessible.
Okay. And Simone as well, is your project ongoing, or is it established now, or is it still a pilot project?
It's still ongoing. I haven't had a chance to look at publishing, but the workshops still run. I'm running some workshops for RCOT early next year. I also run the workshop as part of our general in-service training, so all new starters are actually able to access it, and we've actually, when it runs, we open it up to other allied health professional students to join the workshop. I just would like to say finally is obviously there's some fantastic work and resources that are clearly going on in the university. I think sometimes as practice educators, we don't always get to kind of hear what you guys are doing. So it might be useful that if these products are happening, especially if you have kind of institutes that you kind of regularly seek for placement opportunities, if you can kind of link in with those services, whether it's NHS or social services, just to help it be embedded on the other side. Because I mean, what you guys are doing is fantastic, but what we really also really need to promote is also practice educators as well being more receptive and having that education as well. So, there's no point doing it twice and us all doing things separately. So really, please link in with the institutions to make sure that your fabulous work is embedded in their induction processes as well.
I think it's just about everything getting done in the HEIs and how that translates into practice, isn't it? And how it's being used every day on the ground as well, because it's all good doing some research, but and doing the resources, but then if people aren't using it, yeah. So I think I definitely agree with that. Okay, so we've just come to the end now, really. I don't want to keep you any longer. So just reflection and feedback. So in the chat, there is a form. If you'd just like to fill out the form, just give us give feedback, and obviously so how we can develop resources in the future and anything that we can build on. So that'll be great if you can do that. And you can click on the Google form, or there should be a QR code, I think, coming up next. Okay. And also there's a 5-minute reflection tool as well. There'll be a link in the chat, and that will take you to the RCOT website where you can download a reflection tool, and you can just reflect on some of this information today as well, and obviously use it for your CPD as well. Okay, and here is the QR code if you want to scan use your smartphone, or there's the form in the chat that you can just give us feedback for. And so these are the practice-based learning principles that we were talking about earlier on. So there's going to be a link in the chat, and you can just download those and have a look at the website. And these webinars will be hosted on that website soon. Okay, and there's also some other things on there as well: reflective scenarios, placement cafes, and the placement program. There's also further information if you have a look at the website. The link will be in the chat. I think it's in there now. Okay, so thank you for your time and your thoughts. So if you just like to use social media, it's #RCOTPBL, so we can keep up with all the chat and find out what you're all saying, and also visit the website, which will also be in the chat. And that's the website that we're just talking about for the practice-based principles. Well, there's the references as well. So very much thank you for your time, and have a good evening.